those situations that come doesn't excuse us from doing what is right. And so here are a few examples of life's many difficult challenges that happen. Maybe a young husband who find out a week after maybe getting married that his wife has cancer or some dreadful disease, and then maybe we go and buy a home, which today if you go buy a home it's costing you way more than it's really worth if you look at the tax value and the things. But we find out that we get cheated maybe, that the home doesn't have the value that we've paid to purchase it that we thought it did, and then we was pregnant. And these are just some choices or some situations this morning made for these. And we know that we as Christians, we are called to obey God's will even when it comes like more than we can really handle. We know that Christians, and so after all, Jesus Christ is our Redeemer. He paid the redemption price for each and every one of us this morning with his own blood. He done that to deliver us from the grip of sin and death. And we sing hymns of being redeemed. One that came to mind is, I am redeemed by love divine. Glory, glory, Christ is mine. All to him I now resign. I have been redeemed. And we probably wouldn't be moved to sing that hymn this morning with the text of this lesson today. But Boaz here was talking about a property transfer. Naomi was selling this possession. It may have already done so. We don't know. Amalek may have sold it before they left and went to Moab. But we don't really know when this was sold. Naomi could have been selling at this time of the scriptures, but they keep it from falling out of possession. Boaz. And so he talked with this relative whether he was going to buy this land or not. But there was a catch, really. There was a catch-22 that Boaz is not going to throw out there when he's first talking to this other relative. After we'll see where he agrees that he's going to purchase this land, then Boaz throws out there, you're not only going to get the land, but you're going to have to marry Ruth. And so then we'll see that he, who not only is going to redeem Naomi's family's property, but he's also going to marry Ruth. So we begin with chapter 4, verse 1. Then Boaz up to the gate and set him down there, and behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a relative of Naomi's husband's family. And he had a right in line to that than he was. But the way to fulfill that right was he had to assemble a court of witnesses, as they did in the book of Judges. Everything was done at the city gate to make the transaction legal in the eyes of the public. And the only complication in this process was the fact that there was the other relative, even closer to Naomi, who had the first right to redeem this property or to refuse to do so. So to settle this issue, Boaz went out in front of everyone and got 10 elders to the place where all of their business and legal proceedings took place. They didn't have the things that we have today. They handled all this there at that gate of the city. It was right there in the public square. And we saw the other kinsman come by, and Boaz asked him to sit down for the transacting here of this business. And then Boaz here, he had asked 10 of the elders of the city to also pause what they were doing to come and to hear the case that Boaz was wanting to settle. And the fact that he went and got 10 elders, these 10 elders were very wise men. They were very intellectual, and they really spoke of his admiration that they had for him, that he was. And so there was no requirement in the law for him to have 10 men to be seated, but evidently 10 was sufficient here to make any deal that would be legal and binding. Later on, it only took 10 to take on the role of kinsman and redeemer for Ruth. If we read back in chapter 3, get Boaz to court her Instead of him running after her, she was running to become her kinsman, her redeemer. She wanted him to be her husband. And so Boaz informed Ruth that there was one, indeed, that was closer to do so. And we see it was the family redeemer's task here to buy the land and to keep it in the family. If the brother's wife, if his brother passed away, then it was obligation for the next brother to marry his wife and keep on with the family tradition and the family name. That's the way it was back in that day. But it was his task to do so. And it was also his task his relative to marry the widow. But last week we know that Boaz referred to God as protecting Ruth like a bird does the young under their wing. So this meant that this was providing protection and shelter for her. So in Ruth's request for Boaz that she put to him, for him to be her redeemer, she was just simply asking him to take her as his maidservant, to take her under his wing of protection and provision to provide for her. So it was just really a clear request that was coming from Ruth here to Boaz that he understood. He understood that immediately and started the process to become her kinsman and redeemer. So in order for him to do that, he had to get it out there in the public square to make it all legal, to make it binding. Verse 3, and he said unto the kinsman Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know. For there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So with everyone in place there to hear the reason from Boaz for holding this court, Boaz explained to this other kinsman about the property that once had belonged to Naomi's husband, to Elimelech. He called him their brother, that it was for sale, that it was up for grabs. And he was giving this closer kinsman the opportunity to make the purchase because he was the first in line. And the property there had once belonged to Elimelech. And Naomi was probably having to sell this if it wasn't already sold before they left. Maybe she was trying to sell it for income because she didn't have a husband. She was a widow. She was not able maybe to do a lot of things to earn income, to earn money. They didn't have welfare back then because she couldn't work. Maybe she couldn't work the land to produce a harvest, to produce grain for income. It was a time where women were to be submissive and had less public roles back in that day. Men were dominant during this very time period. So the property could be sold to a near kinsman to keep it in the family, which was the way God intended for it to be. And so if the land happened to be sold outside of the family, it would go back to the family in the year of Jubilee, which was every 5th year. So that meant the land should not be sold forever. If it did get sold outside of the family, then the year of Jubilee, it would be able to come back to them. But Boaz here, he's explaining this situation and this scenario. He's doing it so very clearly to this other kinsman that he made certain that this relative understood that what was going on here was a very legal transaction that was taking place. They wasn't just having small talk. And so he referred to the 10 people here that he had gathered as witnesses, the elders, for this, telling him to either buy it before the inhabitants thereof and before these elders, before maybe this jury, if we want to put it that way, but before these elders of the people. And after the man had heard this proposition, he said that he would redeem it. But Boaz was letting him know, if you're not going to buy it, just say so, because I'm next in line. I'm going to buy it if you don't, is what he was telling him. But he probably thought it would be to his advantage to do so, this other kinsman, to make maybe extra income for him, to expand what he already had, thinking he would be even more wealthy by buying this part of land. But Boaz here, we're going to learn that he's prepared for this type of response from this kinsman. He was already thinking that this guy was going to buy it, you know. He already had that feeling. He already knew that. But Boaz was very wealthy himself. And so Boaz was a very good businessman. He knew how to talk like a car salesman. He knew how to make a sales pitch. He knew how to make a deal. He knew how to make something happen in the way he wanted it to. And so he was prepared for this. And so we're going to see where he provides a little bit more of the information than what he first told this guy about this transaction that was going to be taking place to this other relative. Verse 5, then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the land of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. And so now Boaz, after the guy said he's going to buy it, he throws this other second part out to it. You're not only going to just be buying the land, but you're also buying you a wife. And so he knew that maybe this other kinsman probably wouldn't want a second wife, and he certainly wouldn't want one that was not of Hebrew, that was not from Israel, because Ruth was a Moabite. She wasn't Jew. She was a Gentile. She was unclean to them. And so at first to the man, it sounded like a very good idea, right, for him to purchase this property until he heard part two, until he heard the rest of the story. We had a Paul Harvey moment here. You've all heard of Paul Harvey, and now the rest of the story. So Boaz is throwing in the rest of the story to this guy. He was agreeable with this, since it meant that he was expanding his property, that he was more than likely going to expand his wealth. He was going to become more wealthy, and he was going to have more for his children to inherit later on after he passed away. But when the rest of the story was told to him, that he would have to marry Ruth and raise up children who would in turn inherit this land that he was getting ready to purchase one day, suddenly the whole situation changed for him. And then he refused to buy the property. He said there, and the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself. So he was giving up his right. He was giving up his spot to Boaz to buy this land, because now he didn't want it. He didn't want everything that come along with it. He didn't want the horse and the wagon. He just wanted the land. And so had this man followed through with being this redemption plan here, he would have added an extra expense, because then he would have to be supporting Ruth. And then if they had children, he'd be supporting her. So suddenly what he thought was going to make him some money was actually probably not going to make him as much as he was wanting. And so he knew that they would indeed be raising some children out of this union. But in addition, he would lose the purchased land to any son that him and Ruth would have bore, that they would have made. The inheritance he had for his own children could also be in jeopardy too. So if he had any children with Ruth, then they could cut in on what his other children were possibly going to get. So the deal became much more less attractive to him than it did at first. When he first had heard of it, when he first started listening to Boaz of this land transaction. So what sounded like a good idea to him, it suddenly became not so very good to him. So then he just simply refused to purchase the land because he didn't want anything to do with all those added features to the transaction. So before the witnesses here, before those 10 elders that were present, he told Boaz he could not make the purchase. He wasn't going to, so he's telling Boaz, now you can make this purchase if you wanting to do so. You can have it. I don't want it anymore. You've done talked me out of it. And that was Boaz's thinking all along, right? Because he didn't tell that at first. He waited until after the guy said he was wanting to buy it. So then Boaz had that in his back pocket or in his front, close to his shirt pocket, like String Bean used to, and pulled that out and throwed it out. So he knew that it was certainly going to change the guy's mind. So now this was the matter in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor. And this was a testimony in Israel. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. So when we look back through in the Old Testament and all the laws there, some that we come across that we can seem to consider as strange, maybe it might be even meaningless to us. But as we have seen in those laws in view here, it protected, right? And it impoverished the name of those who died without an heir, someone to take over the family property and name. So we noticed here that all of these transactions were done publicly in front of all the witnesses, in front of these elders. And so we do things a lot, right? We do things a lot with notaries. We do things a lot with lawyers and different things. If you go and do title work, then both of you have to be present, and you have to have a notary there, and where you're signing, and the notary's notarizing all that. That makes the transaction legal, makes it binding, right? As soon as you go buy a car, and you go buy a house, whatever the case may be, we settle things that way. And so we sign contracts that are notarized. And then in the Bible days, this was done this way in front of the elders. Having 10 witnesses would make the same transactions binding as what I just described for us in our times today. And so after publicly declining Boaz's offer here, the nearer relative took off his sandal and gave it to Boaz. This was a symbol that he was giving him or giving up his right as a kinsman redeemer. He was giving that right up. He was giving him his sandal. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I want somebody else's shoe. I don't like to smell my own feet, let alone somebody else's, right? But that's the way they did things. That was a way to show their way of binding this transaction. And so the way was now clear for Boaz to buy this land. Now Boaz could buy the land and he could marry Ruth. What was all going on there in chapter 3 that we didn't read or study or talk about a whole lot, of where Naomi was giving Ruth advice of how to draw even more of Boaz's attention, how to really show Boaz, hey, I'm interested in you. I don't care that you're older than I am. I want you to be my husband. I want you to be my kinsman. I want you to redeem me from this destitute situation and shape that I am in. And so Boaz wanted to do both. He wanted to get the land, and he also had a love for Ruth. And so he was going to be able to do exactly both of them, which is what he wanted to do all along, even when he started here in chapter 4, verse 1, talking with his other kinsman. Boaz was hoping and praying and thinking and coming up with a way to get this other guy not to purchase this transaction. Boaz, though, he was willing to do out of love and out of sacrifice. This other guy was merely doing it to gain for his own self. to gain further in prosperity. We can see that because as soon as he found out he was going to have to purchase Ruth as well, that he had no love within his heart or in his mind for this land. It was just something for him to get wealthier that we see with a lot of things today. But Boaz was willing to do both out of love and out of sacrifice. He was going to sacrifice what he already had to make this purchase because he knew how the Levitical law went. He was very honorable in that. He knew that. He was very faithful to God of Israel. And he knew Boaz, he was willing to do all of this that the other man was unwilling to do, that was unwilling to go through to purchase this. Boaz cared. He cared for both Ruth and Naomi. And he also cared, and he cared because he cared about what would happen to them. And so do we obey God out of just merely our duty, or do we do it out of love? We should always obey God out of love, not just because we feel it's just our duty to do something, not because we feel it's our duty just to come to church Sunday night, Sunday morning, Wednesday night, whatever time the church doors are open, just because I don't really want to go, but I guess I have to. We do that because we love God, and we love assembling, we love coming to church and worship Him, not because we feel it's our duty. We know that Jesus asked Peter, said, "Do you love me?" Right? And Peter responded to the Lord. He said, "You know I love you." And Jesus then responded back to Peter, "If you love me, then go and feed my sheep." Right? So we're to feed the sheep and the world of the love of Jesus Christ. We're to do all that out of love, not just because we feel we're obligated or feel that we have to. We do it because we love our fellow man, right? And so we show the love of Jesus. We show the love that Jesus showed what love is, right? Because he says, love is, for there is no greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And so Jesus laid down his life for you, and he done it for me. He done it for the whole world. He didn't do it just for one particular person. Because in John 3:16 it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." So Boaz knew the law of God because he was faithful to him. And so he was obeying the will of God, for he hath ordained this to happen. God had ordained all of this to take place this way for Ruth and Naomi and for Boaz. God already knows everything that goes on. He knows everything that happens to us. He knows what's going to happen in the next minute, hour, whatever. You get the point. God had already had ordained this. He already knew what was going to take place. Verse 9, "And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, You are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren and from the gate of his place. You are witnesses this day." And so here in these verses, Boaz is making this public declaration in front of all the witnesses that was gathered there, in front of the 10 elders, that he had bought this land that had once belonged to Elimelech, but he also was taking care of the widow that was married to one of Elimelech's sons, so that that family name could carry on, and that he was taking Ruth here to be his wife. And so now the property could stay within the family, and Ruth, him and Ruth could carry on the family name through Boaz. And so Boaz was the redeemer in this situation. He was the kinsman redeemer. He had kept the family from breaking up and the property from going into strange hands, from going into strangers. But he also provided for Naomi's family. He provided for Elimelech that was dead, and their 2 sons that were dead. He was providing for all of them. He was doing this by giving them stability. right, that had previously been taken away from their deaths because it made Naomi and Ruth widows. We know that Orpah stayed back in Moab. And so, but this Old Testament concept here of Boaz being a kinsman redeemer, it just only points to Jesus Christ as being our kinsman redeemer. What Boaz had done here for Ruth and Naomi and Elimelech's family, it just really foreshadowed what Jesus did for us. Like Boaz here, Jesus paid the price that no one else would or could pay. We couldn't pay for our own sins, and no one else could pay for them. Only Jesus Christ could do so. And so the only one that could pay for this in this situation, since the first kinsman redeemer turned it down, was Boaz, because he was next in line. And so Jesus paid the price. He paid the price for us, his own life. He paid it with his own life to redeem us. And so Boaz had fallen in love with this poor outsider, Ruth. She was an outsider to Israel, and he decided to make her his own. He did what he needed to do, right? He did it by making it legal, by having witnesses to this transaction that he was doing. So it's really a wonderful picture to us this morning of Jesus Christ loving us and then setting out to pay the redemption price for us in order to acquire us as his bride. You know, Jesus cares for us. He cares for us so much that he bled and that he died for our sins. And so he's to take us as his bride. He washed our sins away with his blood. Our sins were as red as scarlet, but he washed it white as snow with his own precious blood. And so Ruth cared for Naomi in last week's lesson, right? She cared for Naomi that she would return back to Naomi's homeland, to become accustomed to Naomi's customs, to worship Naomi's God, to leave all of her knowledge of her own people behind. And she was willing to go and take on this hardship, because it would be a hardship for Ruth, being a foreigner, not knowing the customs of Israel, not knowing who Israel's God was. But she was willing to do so because she cared and she loved her mother-in-law, Naomi. So in return, Boaz knew all of this. He knew how Ruth had cared for Naomi. So Ruth cared for Naomi, and now Boaz was going to care for Ruth. He was going to take care of her. So there's some things in this biblical account here of Boaz and Ruth that we just simply cannot ignore. First, we have to recognize the love and kindness that Ruth had shown to Naomi in providing for her after the loss of Elimelech and her sons and all of that. And then we note here that the kindness that Boaz showed to Ruth by paying this special attention to her and even doing the duty here of being the family redeemer when the closer relative declined that privilege and responsibility. And then we also need to see how these people follow God's law. They followed that by trusting him to bring about a happy ending to this story that was once of tragedy and hardship. So the same plays out for us today. We have to fully trust in God to bring about a happy ending within our lives, within our tragedies, and within our hardships. So in the lives of Boaz and Ruth, we really see the working here of the great God of Israel. He showed both of them grace to both. God had blessed this couple by putting them in the lineage that would bring forth the Messiah, that would bring forth the Lord Jesus Christ. And so this story here of Ruth and Boaz, it's really filled with the compassion and love for outsiders. And all that did was just really foreshadow all of the compassion and all of the love and all of the mercy and all of the goodness and all of the kindness and the reconciliation that the Lord Jesus Christ would offer us, that he did for us, to bring us and the whole entire world back to God. So I trust you got something this morning, Mom. You dismiss us.